obviously no one had anticipated. 3 airplanes that were deliberately aimed at critical targets in America. We can only hope that it's over for today, but officials are taking no chances on all that. They're evacuating all critical buildings because, as Mr. Johnson said earlier, this is an open society. James Kallstrom from the FBI also pointing out that almost anyone can come in here. They have access to so many instruments that can be used as instruments of attack and terrorism, and that certainly has been the case today.
Let's go to our State Department correspondent, Andrea Mitchell. Andrea, what can you tell us?
Well, this from the FBI. The State Department has been evacuated. There was a meeting going on in the Operations Center. Other top officials were in the Situation Room at the White House. Colin Powell is in Bogota, Colombia, on a 2-day trip. But this very interesting information, Katie, Matt, and Tom, from the FBI, they had been operating a massive exercise from their hostage rescue unit. All of their top teams, about 50 personnel, helicopters, equipment, were in Monterey, California for the last 2 days, scheduled to fly back today commercially. So all of those people are out of place. It's fair to say, according to sources that we've talked to here at NBC, that the FBI rescue operations and other FBI operations are really in chaos right now because they can't reach their officials in New York. All of their phone lines are down, and now you've got all of their special experts on this stuck in Monterey, California, trying to get a military flight back because there are no longer commercial flights. So they are seriously out of pocket, and there is a real breakdown of the FBI anti-terror coordination team, which is, of course, the principal team that would lead any effort and was so effective under Jim Kallstrom in New York City during the World Trade Center bombing and the TWA explosion, which, of course, turned out not to be terror.
Andrea, is the State Department taking this claim of responsibility from the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine seriously? Are they giving any credence to that, or are they dismissing it, or how do they feel about who might have been responsible for this?
I think it is far too early for them, even the best experts in the government, to figure this out. They have one instant reaction, as you know, and it could be wrong, but their immediate reaction in a case like this would be to look toward Osama bin Laden and the collateral groups connected to him, simply because he has proved with the embassy bombings in Africa that he is the one terror leader who is capable of this kind of highly coordinated attack. The bombings went off in Tanzania and in Kenya almost simultaneously. It was extraordinarily well coordinated. They proved their case to a jury effectively and have managed to develop a great deal of information from sources, from in fact turning some former members of his network.
Andrea?
So they believe, Tom, that he is the most likely person, but it's far too early to say anything.
We want to tell you that American Airlines has confirmed that one of its flights, American Airlines Flight number 11 from Boston's Logan Airport, scheduled to go to LAX. It left at 8 a.m. this morning. 45 minutes later, it was diverted into the World Trade Center. It was the airline that was involved. We can only assume on a popular flight like that it probably had a capacity load of passengers and crew on board. There was a hijacking. That was the first plane that was involved. We don't know about the second plane yet, nor do we know the origins of a third plane that deliberately flew itself into the Pentagon this morning near the heliport. NBC Jim Miklashevsky now has been forced to evacuate that building, and so we'll have to wait till we hear from him.
Saw some pretty dramatic pictures from the Pentagon just moments ago, Matt.
Let's go back to a few seconds ago. This is now about an hour after the first impact. We saw some dramatic footage of a portion of one of the Twin Towers, actually it appearing to fall away from the rest of the building. Can we go to the tape now? Here we go, right here. This is, I mean, when you look at it, the building has collapsed. That tower just came down.
Let's go to Bob Bazell, who is at St. Vincent's Hospital. Bob, what's going on there? What can you tell us?
Katie, St. Vincent's Hospital is one of the hospitals that's closest to the World Trade Center. In the last few minutes, ambulances have been coming in one right after another. Most of the people they're bringing in have second and third degree burns, very serious burn victims. They say the smoke inhalation people will probably be the most serious, but they're not even close to getting to them yet. There's a triage operation that's going on in the area. Ambulances are being dispatched to every hospital in New York City. The entire staff of this hospital has come in from wherever they are, and it's true at hospitals across New York City. They're standing there. As soon as an ambulance pulls in, dozens of medical workers rush up to it. But it's a carnage that's just beginning. Everybody here, the emergency service workers I spoke to who have been down into the World Trade Center site say this is just the tip of the iceberg. There's going to be massive amounts of casualties.
Bob, what are they telling you about people? Were there many people inside the building, or is it just too early to tell where the people were?
Well, there were certainly, probably hundreds, even thousands of people in the building, even though it was before 9 o'clock on the start of the usual work period, because it's just such a large area. So the number of casualties is just enormous, and they're just beginning to sort it out and just starting to get to the first few that they can get to. But the ambulances are just coming in. They're lined up. Every ambulance in New York City has been summoned. They're standing in a queue. They go in as soon as they can get a victim and bring them up here right away.
Bob, we're also looking at the lower end of Manhattan now as a result of the collapse of one World Trade Center. That whole financial district is now engulfed in smoke and debris, and there probably is going to be a lot more smoke inhalation problems as a result of what's going on.
Almost certainly, Tom. I was actually standing and saw that collapse, and everybody here just gasped, and even the medical workers and the ambulance attendants, when they saw that people who are used to tragedy, grabbed each other and hugged each other, and some started to cry.
And of course, one wonders about the triage unit.
Exactly. We're close to the base of that building trying to evacuate people, and when a building of that size falls, it does not fall in its own footprint.
No, absolutely. I'm several blocks north of there, so I don't know what that area looks like, but one can only imagine.
Well, the consequences go on, not just to the World Trade Center and to the poor people who were trapped and caught there, but of course that is the heart of the world financial markets, which have now been shut down effectively as well. So the ripple effect continues this morning as we all try to adjust psychologically and intellectually to what we are witnessing here. It is difficult to comprehend, but this country, the strongest country in the world, has been the target of a major coordinated terrorist attack, and the end is not over yet, even if it's confined to just these three targets. The ripple effect goes on. All air traffic has been shut down. There will be no financial markets in place today. Business has been stopped across the country.
And of course, who knows the human toll that will be the result of this action. Matt actually just pointed out to me on any given day, 50,000 people, Tom, work at the World Trade Center.
And at 8:45 in the morning, if they're not in the building, they're around the building. That's a beehive of activity down there. There is no more active area in terms of pedestrian traffic.
I hate to keep going back to the collapse of that tower, but if you consider that this plane hit at mid-structure, and that would have probably taken out the electrical in the building where elevators wouldn't work and people struggling to get some way out of that tower, and it takes a long time to come down over 100 stories, and to think about the possible loss of life that just occurred by the collapse of that southeastern tower is just amazing. Minna Kathuria is with the Today Show, and she apparently saw the collapse of one of those towers. Minna?
Yes, hi, Matt.
Tell me what you saw.
We're on the corner of Duane and West Broadway, walking down towards the Twin Towers, and it just collapsed. It looked like it looked sort of like the building just demolished. Smoke, clouds, clouds of smoke everywhere. People running towards me. I was going towards the Twin Towers. People were going away from the away from the towers, and it was just people running like I've never seen a scene like it.
Have you, from where you were, Minna, did you see many of the injured being treated? Is there any indication as the type of perimeter that the EMS people were dealing with?
No, I hadn't gotten that close yet. They were sort of blocking off the street. Now what they're doing is totally clearing out the area. And more emergency officials are coming in to help.
Can you just give me an idea of the reaction of people down there, Minna? Just pedestrians?
That's everyone in tears. People who were, I met some woman who was in the building to the right of where the first thing happened, and just all crying, wondering if the people that they know in the buildings next door are okay.
Jamie, Minna, thank you very much. Minna, take care of yourself. Jamie Gangel, our national correspondent, is on the phone now with some more information. Jamie?
Katie, as you well know, buildings around town are being evacuated. The State Department has been evacuated. The White House has been evacuated. And the Pentagon has been evacuated. Intelligence officials tell me that they do believe at the Pentagon that was a third plane going down. They have had, the intelligence sources that I've talked to say that they have not received any claim of responsibility yet.
Jamie, have you gotten any information from Reagan National Airport as to air traffic in the area this morning, or anybody who might have somehow traced this plane or figured out from where it came or where it was going?
They still do not have any of those details yet. It is almost impossible. They were confused for a long time as to whether it's a bomb or a plane. They say now that it appears to be a plane, but they say that that is all the information that they have. As you know, the FAA has shut down all aircraft now, and they are now going back and trying to sort that out. But they do not have any information on that yet.
Do they know what type of plane it might have been?
There is no, unfortunately, they just don't have that yet.
All right, Jamie. Thank you very much, Jamie. We'll be talking with you.
It goes without saying this is the most serious attack in the United States in more than 100 years. Not since the War of 1812, and certainly the damage that we did to ourselves during the Civil War has this country suffered this kind of damage within its interior. Obviously, Pearl Harbor, which triggered World War II, was a horrific event as well, but there has never been an event to match the magnitude of this one, in which everything has been shut down in terms of air traffic. The national capital has been immobilized. The White House, State Department, Pentagon has been attacked. The financial markets have been shut down. There's an untold loss of life here in Manhattan, the nerve center of America, to say nothing of what's going on at the Pentagon.
When's the last time? I mean, this is a shot of New York City and downtown Manhattan that many people can't remember.
It looks
the
like
shot of one tower.
It looks like a movie, frankly,
Right,
that this is unfolding, and it combines the horror of the TWA Flight 800 bombing and the Murrah Federal Building, because it's both of these incidents, of course, coming together in the most horrific way.
By now, I would guess that everyone is up across all the time zones in America. It's 7:15 in the West, obviously, but for those of you who are just joining us at 8:45 Eastern Time, 8:42 Eastern Time today, an American Airlines flight, Flight 11 from Boston to LAX, was crashed into one of the World Trade Center buildings. 15 minutes later, another plane hit the other one. That building has now collapsed. Within an hour of those two attacks, the Pentagon was hit, now we're told, by a plane, an untold number of casualties there. President Bush has been on the air. He was in Florida at the time saying apparently this was a terrorist attack. Everyone now believes that, carefully coordinated from the air. And the consequences of it in terms of human loss and the effect on this country are still to be determined.
We want to go now, Tom, to Kathleen Zici, who's with NYU Downtown Hospital. They've been treating some of the injured. Kathleen, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Can you tell me about the injuries you're seeing and the numbers of people you've been treating?
We've seen a steady stream of patients for approximately an hour and a half. Many appeared to be superficial injuries, but I can't tell you that I've seen the most serious ones because I believe they're going in through the ambulance bay. So we have a very high level of activity here. Our first priority is on the care of those patients. And we do not have an exact tally at this time because of the level of activity at the hospital. We've also been responding to family members and friends who have come seeking information to the hospital.
And just quickly, Kathleen, how far is the hospital from the World Trade Center?
The hospital is perhaps a 5-minute walk from the World Trade Center, and we were the first responder when the Trade Center was attacked in '93, so unfortunately we have some prior experience.
Yeah. What kind of medical support is there downtown? How many hospitals in the immediate area there that could help with the injured?
We are the only hospital south of 13th Street in New York City, so we serve a very large proportion of the city. For that reason, our emergency room is a very high priority of this hospital, and the staff have been doing a heroic job in terms of responding to the patients.
Kathleen, what about the triage unit that is on the ground there? Are they NYU, a team of NYU medical people on the scene as well?
Yes, there are. I cannot respond to that question because I am not on the scene, and I don't have that information.
But you do have medical people, your personnel there at the scene?
That is my understanding, yes.
Katie, what we're worried about now is that the other building may come down. They've obviously evacuated that whole area as a result of the crash of one World Trade Center. Now I'm told that there's concern about the second one collapsing as well. Plainly, there's been an enormous amount of structural damage in the upper floors of all of that. and it is more than 100 stories high. It wouldn't take
110.
much to bring it down.
Kathleen, thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
We're told now that spokesman for Yasser Arafat, the leader of the Palestinian, the leader of the PLA, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, that that Arafat has condemned what has happened here in New York. He says that the PLO has no role in it whatsoever. They're completely shocked and appalled by what is happening. There was just one earlier report that the Radical Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine claimed responsibility, but that was later denied as well. We don't know yet who is in fact responsible for this, but it was very carefully planned and coordinated, and fair to say it has been a devastatingly efficient and effective attack on the heart of this country.
And Pat Dawson is on the ground near the World Trade Center. Pat, are you there? Pat Dawson, can you hear me?
Apparently.
Okay, he's having some audio problems. We'll get to Pat in just a moment.
Just amazing. You have to stop and think about, you know, the hijacked plane and the terror of the passengers on board.
Oh.
As it could have been up to an hour that they realized something was dramatically wrong with this flight, and then thinking that perhaps they were going to John F. Kennedy Airport here in Queens, actually, and the plane suddenly veering into the World Trade Center tower.
Now, you can only imagine.
What is
how
striking to me is that we didn't have any early report of the the hijacking. You know, a lot of people monitor that air traffic talk that goes on, and it wasn't until this happened.
Well, the plane left Boston at 8 o'clock this
45
morning.
minutes later it
So
went
it
in.
was about, 42 minutes later that this occurred.
And it flew right over lower Manhattan. A number of people saw it at a very low altitude and then take this sharp right turn and wondered, according to eyewitnesses, what in the world was going on. Moments later, of course, the World Trade Center was hit. It was about an hour after that Jim Miklashevsky told you, Katie, that he felt an explosion at the Pentagon, and now we learn that there has been a plane that's been flown into the Pentagon. There have been people who have been hurt there, and we hope no one has been killed, but it seems likely that there were probably casualties of a serious magnitude there as well. The White House has been evacuated. The State Department is being evacuated.
There's the Pentagon.
Here's the Pentagon now.
Pat Dawson, apparently, let's just take a quick look at the Pentagon, and as you can see, smoke continues to billow out of that structure. As Tom just mentioned, it's unclear how many people were hurt, and if in fact it was a plane. There is speculation that they believe it was a plane. Let's go to Pat Dawson, who is down by the World Trade Center. Pat, can you hear me?
Right down here, we cannot tell you much more in terms of specific information other than to say that there are probably at this stage, I would say, hundreds, perhaps in the thousands of emergency workers who in the last hour and a half have managed to work their way down here to lower Manhattan and basically try to get into this fray. We are standing right here about 10 to 12 blocks north of the World Trade Center. These firemen that you can see, firefighters are walking down towards the site now, and they literally have been arriving by the dozens over the past hour or so. As we say, probably in excess of 1,000 or more emergency workers from New York City and surrounding areas converging on this site now to try to make some sense of it. As you can imagine, at this point, there is a certain level of chaos because they're just trying to sort out who's alive, who's not. We did speak to, as I said before, some of the emergency workers. They are police officers from the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. That is the organization that has jurisdiction over those two buildings specifically, as well as bridges and tunnels. I spoke to two of them who were actually down there when that building collapsed. They said that they speculate that the loss of life had to be horrific, that there were not that many people down there on the streets at that point, that most of them who had been evacuated, that is civilians. But on the other hand, they said that there were literally hundreds of emergency workers who were down at that end. They have no idea the level of loss of life at this point. When I asked one of them why he was going back in as he suited up since he could barely breathe, he said, "It's my job." And there may be some of my brother officers in there. There may be other people in there. So those officers going in here, as you can see, all kinds of fire workers going in there, literally in the thousands now converging on this site. we cannot give you much of an organizational sense beyond telling you probably what you already know, which is that 2 separate aircraft have struck the 2 towers of the World Trade Center. If memory serves, I think each of those towers stands 110 stories. Some of the dust, as you can probably see now, is blowing in our faces. It just really depends on which way the wind blows as to whether or not we're enveloped in some of the dust and the smoke. As you can see from these pictures, the amount of dust from the fire that's still burning, flames and ash, is extraordinary at this point. And at least a few emergency workers have said that they really aren't so sure that other tower won't stay up now. They really didn't think the first one was capable of coming down, but it did. And so they're basically saying, keep back as far as you can. On the other hand, facing that danger, as we have been telling you, many, many hundreds of these workers are heading over those lines down towards that burning building to try to rescue those people who are in there, be they emergency workers, be they civilians. The original crash took place just about 8:45 by my reckoning. I don't know the exact time, but about 8:45. And when that took place, obviously at that hour, the building would not be packed with people, but it's still late enough in the morning that there would be enough people.
We were listening to Pat Dawson, who's standing near the World Trade Center in Lower Manhattan. And Katie and Tom, I was thinking while Pat was talking, you both spent some time out at Oklahoma City at the Murrah Federal Building after that explosion. It took more than a week to sift through that rubble of a building that was how many stories? Probably...
It was about 30 stories, as I remember.
I'm sorry to interrupt you both, but apparently we've gotten a report that now a car bomb has exploded outside the State Department. Again, that's an initial report that I'm hearing from our producers in the control room. Can we go to anyone for more information on that? Apparently, no more information than that.
Where is Andrea Mitchell? Is she at the State Department?
Well, the State Department has been evacuated, as well as the White House. The U.S. Capitol has been evacuated. Obviously, the Pentagon has as well. We'll go to Mick. Mick, what is the latest from the Pentagon?
Katie, security officials here at the Pentagon have not only evacuated the building, but they're clearing the entire area. Security forces have reported that they have received information of another plane hijacking, that it's about 20 to 25 miles out of Washington, D.C., headed in this general direction. Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld a few moments ago was refusing to leave the building. We ran into the chief naval officer, the top naval officer, Admiral Vern Clark. They were loading him quickly into a car to take him to an alternative command site. Do you have me? They were taking Admiral Clark to an alternative command site. Hello, do you hear me?
Yes,
yeah,
we
can,
do,
Mick.
Mick. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm sorry. There's no confirmation of this latest threat, but security officials here are taking it very seriously. We were standing with Secretary Rumsfeld's security detail, who, as soon as they got the report, went running into the building, and we were herded away. But they have set up an alternative command site somewhere in the area. The Pentagon has set up a crisis team to deal with this situation. But so far, the latest reports are that another plane of some kind may have been hijacked and headed in this direction. Katie?
Yeah, we also should tell you, Mick, this is Tom Brokaw, that the FAA now says that all international flights headed for the United States are being diverted to Canada. This at a time when, as Jim Mikolashevsky is telling us, there's an unconfirmed report that there's been another hijacking. All takeoffs were stopped, but there were planes in the air, obviously, at the time of these first 2 attacks on the Twin Trade Towers and then on the Pentagon.
Andrea Mitchell is standing by with more information. She was at the State Department. Andrea?
The State Department, as you know, has been evacuated. Secretary of State Colin Powell is now en route home from Lima, Peru. He did not get to his destination of Bogota, Colombia today, so that trip canceled. He, as all other officials, heading back. State Department officials and the White House officials and the NSC have all been evacuated as well, although Condi Rice was earlier in the Situation Room. And CIA Director George Tenet has been holding meetings in his office in Langley, Virginia. And as we reported earlier, key FBI team members from their rescue efforts and anti-terror coordinating team were stranded in Monterey, California, where they were on a secret exercise, military exercise,
Right.
against exactly this kind of event.
Andrea,
Yes,
let
sir.
me interrupt for a second. Can you tell us any more about reports we're getting that a car bomb has exploded outside the State Department?
I do not have confirmation of that.
All right.
They did evacuate the State Department, but we do not have confirmation at this moment about a car bomb outside the State Department. You know,
Andrea, thanks. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Ability that probably makes this singularly the largest, most well-coordinated act of terrorism, not just in U.S. history, but probably
certainly in modern times.
In modern times.
Yeah,
unprecedented. It's going to be.
And every time you say that, I'm going to go immediately to Washington now, but every time you say that, I keep thinking of how we are told time and time and time again by the Pentagon and by the State Department that they know something's going on in the world today.
They seem to have the problem at the North Tower, Peter.
Let's look at the North Tower quickly,
seems to be coming down.
Oh my God.
The second tower.
It's hard to put it into words, and maybe one doesn't need to. Both trade towers, where thousands of people work, on this day, Tuesday, have now been attacked and destroyed, with thousands of people either in them or in the immediate area adjacent to them. There is simply no way to accurately describe the emotion this evokes in people all over the world, friends of the United States and enemies of the United States as well. John Miller, very briefly, you said to us just a few minutes ago that this was their concern, that they thought after the first tower went that the second one was vulnerable.
There was constant intelligence that terrorist organizations, and specifically that financed by Osama bin Laden, was trying to mount another series of attacks against the United States. Of course, they thought of the symbolic targets. The most symbolic was the World Trade Center because it had been attacked yet not brought down. And it seems that those concerns that even caused the World Trade Center to hire a senior FBI counterterrorism official just weeks ago to try and beef up security have come home to roost. It's also interesting to say that there is no type of security
which would have prevented against this today. Well, that may not. I was going to say that may not altogether be true, because security operates in waves and concentric circles out around the world. Now we've lost the picture from there, so now we have it again. Well, wherever you are in the United States or in the world today, you can. The landscape of New York City has just been changed, and one has to assume that thousands of lives have been extinguished. And it may be presumptuous to say thousands, but thousands of people work in these buildings, and given the difficulties of evacuating these buildings where, as we've said several times, the elevators may not have been operating and were not operating in at least one tower, tower number 2, the first one which is to go, that is the second attack on the southern tower, the first higher on this end of the tower, but both those towers have now gone. And here's a picture that doesn't exist anymore, because that's not a live picture anymore. Good Lord, it just... Now, can I ask where this picture is from? Do we know where this is? This
is outside the World Trade Center. The sign indicates the approach to the
Brooklyn Bridge. To the Brooklyn Bridge. So we're
on West Street, approximately just north of Vesey Street there.
And you can see the dust and debris. And this is at, I don't know if this is at an early stage or whether this is right now. It's at an early stage because there in the distance you can see at least one of the towers still standing as people wander, many of them dazed. And look at the cell phones in their ears. This is, in the cell phone society, and it's certainly true in the Middle East, people on their cell phones all the time seeking and offering reassurance to their families and their friends that something has happened. In Israel, and at least those who have them in the Palestinian territories these days, there's constant traffic on the cell phones because there is such tension in the region and such tension here today, which is extraordinary, that people wanting everywhere to reassure or find out about what has happened to those who are near and dear to them.
One thing we should update for people listening, particularly in this area, who may have been worried, there was a concern that if this building...
You mean in the New York City area?
Yes. There was a concern if this building fell that it would land on the center they had set up at Stuyvesant High School, where the students were still there. The reports from Stuyvesant High School now are that everybody there is okay.
Stuyvesant High School, the high school in the adjacent area, which the city and the state authorities set up to deal with the casualties that they could get out of the building or had occurred adjacent to the building. It is just clear that a lot of people, we do not know how many, got out of the building. And it is going to take time. It is going to take time. The New York City Office of Emergency Management, which monitors the city and all its vulnerable points, said when this whole thing began this morning, they could not get an immediate handle on precisely what was happening. And it was only, you've seen this before, this is a recording of precisely what happened when the second tower went down. And this is from a very long distance. This camera is located on the edge of the Hudson River on the West Side Drive, up the western side of Manhattan. And I cannot say this is something that people never believed they would see in the United States because, of course, Oklahoma City was when we all had that reaction, when Americans experienced terrorism in the heartland for the first time, believing in many cases that it all happened somewhere else. But I just think that millions of Americans will be stunned by the magnitude of this today. I'm trying to track down John McWethy, our correspondent at the Pentagon. He was evacuated. I'm saying this as much to our control room as anybody. He, like everybody else, was evacuated. And I'd also like to talk, if I may, to Claire Shipman at the White House to see what the progression is there, and Linda Douglas at Capitol Hill, because we do know that the leadership of the Senate, at least, Senator Lott, Senator Daschle, were moved to a secure location while much of this was going on, but it is very difficult to get through on anybody's cell phone. And this is, Pierre Thomas, another reminder of, you wonder if this is something that people anticipate. We now live in the age of cell phone. We now rely on cell phones for so much. When there's chaos like this, too many people on the cell phones, they don't work.
Well, one of the things that they had to deal with today, Attorney General Ashcroft was en route to Milwaukee today. And now with the planes grounded, he's going to have to communicate by phone. They have an internal communication system at the Justice Department that they use in situations like this, video monitors. But again, everyone is dispersed, and with the planes grounded, this created a scenario that they had, quite frankly, hadn't seen before.
It is the grounding of the planes which pretty much brings to a halt. I mean, one assumes that Air Force One with the president is already on its way back to Florida. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. ABC's John McWethy is on a cell phone at the moment, and while he cannot hear me, somebody can tell him to start talking, please, and we'll listen. Okay, we'll try that again. Anytime John McWethy begins to talk and tell us what's happening at the Pentagon, or as much as he knows what's happening at the Pentagon, we will simply let him go. But it's just very difficult to get through on cell phones. Thousands of people trying to find out where where their friends and their relatives are. Thousands of reporters, news organizations, of city organizations, state organizations, federal organizations, trying to understand not only what happened today, which in some respects is secondary, but to get something done. And there's just so much agitation around. You get a report just a couple of moments ago from the security at the Capitol Police saying that they believe a hijacked plane may be bound for the Capitol. There's an intensity in the air and a fear and a trauma in the air at 20 minutes to 11 Eastern Time in the United States, 20 minutes to 8 on the West Coast, or in the western part of the United States. The day has just beginning, and all of this has happened in just under an hour. The first attack on the trade tower was just before 10 o'clock. The second one came at 3 minutes after 10. We have a strike on the Pentagon, which came a little after that, and the country is just riddled. 9 o'clock. 9 o'clock. 9 o'clock, I'm sorry. The country is just overrun, as it's inevitable it would be with rumors. I'm curious, John, in terms of the emergency operation that you monitor, are they in a sense of panic? Are they or just in a sense of chaos?
In a sense of chaos. There was a brief sense of panic, which is understandable when the first tower collapsed. By the time the second tower collapsed, they were prepared for it. There were numerous other injuries. The level of coordination is incredible. The FDR Drive, which is a main artery, has been shut down for the purpose of keeping it clear for ambulances to go to hospitals. They've anticipated that the lower Manhattan hospitals in New York City will fill up, so they have started to arrange helicopter flights to go to hospitals further out in the circle. They've really been pretty well coordinated throughout this. If you can possibly be coordinated during a series of spontaneous events that amount to disaster.
This is war, and war by another definition. We did manage to get Rebecca Cooper, one of our reporters, on the phone from the White House. That's how difficult it is at the moment to communicate. Rebecca, do you hear me? Rebecca Cooper at the White House, do you hear me? All right, the same case with Rebecca as with John McCarthy at the Pentagon. If we do hear from them, we'll simply interrupt and let them get on talking. Yeah, Rebecca, do you hear me?
Yes, Peter, I hear you. I'm in the basement of the 815 Connecticut Avenue. It's a building across the block from the White House, across the park. You know where that is, next to the Chamber of Commerce. I had to come down here because, as you said, none of the cell phones are working. I'm in the engineer's office, and they've given us their phones to use. There's a real dichotomy here at the White House, Peter. Tourists who still are not fully aware of what's happening across the nation are standing there watching with curiosity. They keep getting moved back, but those of us who are inside the White House realize the severity of the situation. I was inside the White House this morning trying to gather information for you when we were told by a very nervous White House security staff that they feared a plane was headed to the White House, and we heard planes indeed overhead, and they quickly evacuated all of us out of the White House. Now, I just got off the phone with my own crying mother who was very worried about where I was, and I will tell other mothers and fathers of people who work at the White House and reporters who work at the White House that most of the White House has been evacuated. In fact, in the building where I am now, people have cordoned up other offices to try and coordinate the federal response to this. There are actually phone calls being placed to the legal counsel of the FAA from this building because they don't have cell phone connections. They are out of their offices. They are doing a good job of coordinating the federal response from here, but they are having to take all kinds of emergency measures to coordinate this response. But even the White House chef, who just days ago was preparing a lovely state dinner for President Fox of Mexico, I saw him and I tried to speak to him. And frankly, Peter, he was too rattled. He said he couldn't speak, and he was with his staff, and they were all very anxious and very worried because, of course, they did know what's going on in the country today.
Many thanks, Rebecca Cooper. And if you just see that picture that was going by as Rebecca was talking, you get a real sense of what the urgency was in the White House. First of all, the White House police came walking out, and then people began to run out of the White House. In and of itself, astonishing, because we live with the notion that if there is any place in the United States which is fiercely protected, including an anti-aircraft battery, at least one on the roof of the White House itself, this is the place where the president and the vice president, of course, are to be secure. Claire Shipman is on the phone from the White House. Claire, we are now looking at at what appear to be fairly relaxed security officers on the roof of the White House, looking at in the distance as they always do, talking occasionally to each other. There doesn't seem to be a high level of tension there. What's it like on the ground?
Well, there's considerable tension on the ground, Peter. We are actually looking at a similar picture because we're across the street from the White House now in the Hay Adams Hotel. The entire area around the White House has been completely evacuated. It's very quiet. The police seem tense. They're carrying automatic weapons. We've also seen a couple of what appear to be fighter jets overhead. Everybody in this area has been sent home from all major government offices. It's a reverse commute. The highways, we're told, are just jammed. As you know, President Bush is on his way back to the White House. They've checked his plane considerably before sending him on his way. But as you mentioned, these guys on top of the White House roof are almost always here. And ever since that incident a few years ago when a plane actually landed on the White House lawn, they've upped security measures so that they wouldn't have any other aircraft nearby. And that may be why they seem a little more relaxed than other areas around town. As you know, the AP has been reporting that there was a car bomb that went off at the State Department, and a lot of people are talking about that. And there's also been some report that there were bomb threats on Capitol Hill, but we're still trying to find out more about that, Peter.
Thanks very much, Claire. There are indeed reports from the Federal Aviation Administration that there are possibly 1 or 2 more planes that have been hijacked this morning and are still missing. When you think of the number of aircraft that crisscross the United States, not to mention fly overseas every day, this is the Pentagon. This is the Pentagon. This is live coverage from the Pentagon now, which gives you some sense of the force with which this aircraft, described to us as a small commuter-sized aircraft, flew into a side of the Pentagon coming from the south this morning. And again, the communications in the country are so difficult at the moment, and as you've heard beginning to hear from everybody, the cell phone network is choked for a variety of reasons, that it's hard to get a handle at this point on casualties at the Pentagon or the extent of damage. The one place in which we can be focused, because it is such a small place, Manhattan, 11 miles long, is the Twin Trade Towers. And by some remote chance, if you've just joined us on television, the Twin Trade Towers in New York City have been destroyed, with hundreds, presumably, or perhaps thousands of people in them. Each of the 2 towers was struck today, attacked today by an aircraft, one of which at least we know was hijacked. And this is the second tower that went just a few minutes ago. A scene of chaos and devastation in the lower part of New York City, right on the edge of the Hudson River. Everybody in the United States is familiar with the Twin Trade Towers, and we have no idea whether there were tourists there who show up every morning to go and stand on the top of the trade towers, because it is one of the most expansive views southwest and north of the city and the area itself. Bill Blakenmore is down there. Bill, do you hear me?
I do, Peter.
Go ahead.
I'm just north of Canal Street, just a few blocks north of the Trade Tower area. Throngs of people have been, of course, moving north, some of them silent, most of them looking stunned, just saying, we're just trying to get out of the area after both towers have collapsed. We're seeing Delta Wing jet fighters circling overhead, just one at a time. When the first one appeared, the group of people amid which I was standing shrieked and said, oh my God, there's another attack. And then they realized that being a Delta Wing jet fighter, it was probably the U.S. military, which of course it seems to be. There's just a couple of helicopters, apparently police helicopters, circling overhead. And on this very clear morning now, the unusual sight is the lack of the trade towers sticking up above the buildings that are normally here. People have now begun to accept, but just barely begun to accept what's happened. All business at a complete standstill, nothing but sirens down here as these throngs move further and further north, just walking away from what they can barely begin to understand. Peter?
Bill, how far north did this, I mean, we looked at some streets which debris had just gone in a huge, wide area.
Right. I seem to be just north of where that hit. I'm just up at Canal, so there seem to have been enough low-lying buildings, that is no more than, say, 20 or 30 stories high, between us and the base of the tower to have protected people here from the debris. But here's another man walking past me, just looking completely dazed, going north. 2 or 3 other women. The crowds are beginning to thin out now, as most of the people who were just standing around and watching were working there. One woman came up just talking a mile a minute with her daughter and her friend and her daughter, describing how they had gone to their school this morning. She was about to go to the trade tower to pick up something from a shop there when her daughter said, "I want a sandwich, Mommy," and so she stayed back. She said, "Otherwise I would have been there." They're still trying to understand how they're so lucky not to have been over there. There must be thousands of such stories here this morning, Peter, of those that were the lucky ones.
Thank you, Bill. Please stay in touch as often as you can. It's now 10 minutes to 11 Eastern Time, 10 minutes to East in 2 minutes to 8 in the West. And I'm just going to add to the chaos and the trauma of the day by saying that a large plane has now crashed just north, or shouldn't I say just, but crashed about 10 o'clock in the last 15 minutes, north of Somerset County Airport, about 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh. This is reporting from one of the Pittsburgh television stations as a result of a 911 call from the airport itself. There are no other details on this crash yet, and it's not clear whether the crash was related to anything else that has happened in the country today. But the plane, which was believed to be a Boeing 767, crashed about 10 a.m., just about 8 miles east of Jennerston, Pennsylvania. People in the area will undoubtedly be reporting in more clearly to us on that. The New York mayor's race is having a primary today. That has now been canceled. Both on the Republican and the Democratic side, there was I apologize for interruption. Somebody's trying to say something. Go ahead, please. Okay, just stand by just for 1 second while I just finish. Just repeating, the New York mayoralty primary has been canceled today, and as we said, there's reaction coming in from the Middle East, including a claim of responsibility, then a denied responsibility, now a message from the Palestinian President Yasser Arafat condemning the aircraft attacks on the World Trade Center and sending the condolences of the Palestinian people to those who have been victimized by it. Outside the Pentagon, another member of our ABC News staff, Chris Dreer. Chris, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Peter.
So would you tell us what you can see?
Yes, Peter, I'm standing at the fringe of Arlington Cemetery watching the Pentagon as the top of it caves in. There's a lot of black smoke, a lot of twisted debris. The Pentagon itself has caved in from the top. There is much fire coming out of the windows. It looks like something from World War II, Peter.
Chris, can you tell me, it's a little hard to tell on television, how much of the building has collapsed? How wide is it? How deep is it? Do you have a sense of that?
Yes, I do, Peter. The center portion of the Pentagon appears to be breached. That is, apparently there's a courtyard, and the of that is completely caved in from where I am, from where I see it.
Okay, I think you're on a cell phone, Chris, but just confirm for me that a portion of the building has been breached and the aircraft appears to have pushed its way through into the courtyard?
Yes, indeed it has. I believe, Peter, that that's where the plane is, but I am not sure at this time.
Okay, thank you very much, Chris. Is there any evidence, is there any movement around there at the moment? We're looking at a fairly static picture. Are there people arriving, people disappearing, ambulances coming?
Peter, there's a great deal of glass and wind fire coming out of the windows, but on the other side of the Pentagon is where most of the emergency vehicles are now. I'm going to try and get around to that side to see what I can see.
Okay, thank you very much. I should tell you that all military personnel in the District of Columbia area now, all military personnel in the district, are now on something that is called Threat Level Delta, which is the highest state of alert in the military, and all other people, all other military personnel in the country are now on alert status Charlie, which, John Miller, we know is a somewhat lower status of alert, but still a reminder that this disaster has spread like wildfire through all of the political and military establishment in the country. All museums and monuments in Washington are now shut for the day. It's ironic to hear Claire Shipman telling us there that tourists are still standing around waiting to get into the White House today. Not surprisingly, unfamiliar perhaps with what has happened everywhere else, though, as it was, for example, when John F. Kennedy was assassinated, word spread dramatically, mouth to mouth, person to person across the country in a huge wave of information and emotion and confusion. And now I just want to sort of, as often happens, to contradict some of the earlier reporting from Washington. Our State Department sources now believe that there was no car bomb at the State Department, as was reported a little earlier by a number of sources in Washington. We believe there was no car bomb at the State Department, so the State Department at this point is free of violence, but it has been evacuated, as has the Congress, as has the Treasury building. And we've told you several times that the leadership of the House and the Senate, at least the Senate anyway, have been taken to a location which is deemed to be secure. There is still some concern among our intelligence sources in Washington that one more aircraft somewhere is unaccountable, or is unaccounted for, I should just say. Pierre Thomas, I know you're talking as best you can under the circumstances to all of your sources in the FBI. This is your beat. What are they telling you, if anything?
Well, early on today, they were saying that they thought that there was at least one hostage situation in terms of the plane being hijacked, but they were scrambling just as we are, trying to get additional communication, trying to get additional information, and that's one of the problems early on in a disaster like this, is they're trying to get the information in, they're trying to sort through what they have, and then make decisions based on that.
Okay, but does it appear to be an orderly procedure as far as you can tell throughout the country?
Yes, what they do in these cases, the Special Operations Center, which is based at the FBI headquarters in Washington, will go on full alert. The FBI director, Deputy Director Tom Picard, will come down. They will begin to communicate with their facilities throughout the U.S. It's interesting to note, Bob Mueller, the FBI, new director of the FBI.
Hardly been on the job at all.
Has not been on the job more than 2 weeks. So he's now being baptized by fire in terms of how to deal with a crisis like this.
Okay, Pierre, thanks very much. Pierre Thomas, who covers the Justice Department and is sitting here working the phones trying to get through. Because in some respects, what you're looking at on television, with the one exception of the collapse of the buildings in New York City in the last hour, it doesn't begin to convey, and nor can we, the tension in the country from everywhere, because you not only have something happening, but you have all of this reporting coming in from otherwise, from respectable intelligence, information, police agencies saying there are other things to be worried about. John Miller, who's sitting with me, covering New York City in his ear, because he knows these police networks so well, had a sense that the second tower was going to go, and other people must have had the same thing.
They did. The first indication was they started to broadcast reports that they felt it was leaning and that there was a buckle in the northwest corner. And then as you and I were speaking live, they said it's going, and it went.
On the phone with us, I think from Washington at the moment, is Vince Canestraro, with whom we often discuss matters of terrorism. Vince, can you hear me? Vince, can you hear me? Vince Canestraro? Okay, when we make it.
One thing that's
Vince, can you hear me, Vince Canestraro?
Yes, I can.
Okay, well, I don't know what else to do at the moment except to ask your observations on this, because just go ahead.
Well, it's a pretty stunning event, a sequence of events. I think most of the intelligence information available to the U.S. government pointed at attacks at U.S. installations abroad, most recently in Asia. I think that no one had really anticipated a major attack on U.S. soil.
Why not? Come on, Vince, why not? Why should, in the wake of Oklahoma City, in the wake of the attack on the trade towers and all this talk about international terrorism with its tentacles everywhere, Why did nobody anticipate it happening here?
I think they anticipated only more sophisticated biological or chemical attacks from terrorist groups. But this was a series of attacks using conventional means, hijacked plane, suicide bombers. I don't think anyone in the intelligence community really anticipated that the terrorist groups that they had identified had the capability to do these kinds of events inside the United States. Now, were they wrong? Obviously. And should they have anticipated a level of cooperation among alienated groups, terrorist groups that wanted to punish the United States? Certainly, they should have. But I don't think anyone anticipated that any of the groups could have done this kind of coordinated, synchronized terrorist events.
I want to know more about that, Vincent. I don't mean to have you have to defend the intelligence community, but we hear this all the time. Groups are not sophisticated to do this. Did the intelligence community fall in love with the notion of biological and chemical attacks and not anticipate that guys could hijack airplanes? They've been doing it since the 1970s.
I don't think there's any question about that. They were anticipating new kinds of threats. All the money in the counterterrorism budget went towards preparation for a BW or nuclear attacks on U.S. soil. But what we have seen time and time again, that terrorists are able to exploit conventional materials in a very devastating way. What McVeigh did at Oklahoma City in 1995, using commercially available materials to some devastating effect, although they weren't the casualties that we see today. But 1993,
Hey, but Vince, let me interrupt you for a second, and I apologize. I sound like on the attack here, but there's a feeling in the. You notice I haven't called anybody a terrorism expert this morning.
I don't think anyone wants to be known as a terrorism expert.
Thank you very much, and but we have a series of terrorism experts who appear in our lives and sometimes sound off knowledgeably. I exclude you from this, by the way, otherwise I wouldn't raise it in your precedent. Sound off, knowledgeably about how we know this group and that group and that group. And this is, among other things, a desperate failure of intelligence in both the human and technical area. Am I right?
There's no question about it, Peter. It's a major intelligence failure, the inability to anticipate this kind of a terrorism event on U.S. soil. I think that they were focused on bin Laden in Afghanistan. They were focused on U.S. facilities abroad, and I don't think they believed that bin Laden or a consortium of groups collaborating together had the capability or the willingness to do this kind of thing. Is that a false assumption? Obviously. Yeah. We saw what they did with the USS Cole last year. It was a very sophisticated U.S. warship that was almost totally destroyed with the loss of 17 lives by suicide bombers.
And just one other thing before I let you go back and work the beat for us, if you would, and that is Osama bin Laden. Some of my colleagues and I argue here about the U.S. emphasis on bin Laden. It's bin Laden, bin Laden, bin Laden. It's if the United States gets only one focus at a time in terms of somebody involved in terrorism. Has the intelligence community fallen in love with the notion that only bin Laden can do this?
No, I don't think they have. They certainly have focused on bin Laden as the bête noire and as the architect of terrorism against U.S. officials, U.S. citizens. But in this case, the resources and the coordination and the direction to do these kinds of events requires capabilities beyond any one single group. In other words, there had to be cooperation, possibly with some state support, to do this kind of thing.
Okay.
I mean, we've been hearing for the last 2 months that bin Laden was getting ready to do something, but I don't think anyone was looking here as the object of his next event.
Okay, Vince, I much appreciate it, and I hope you go work the beat for us and you check back with us for the day. I'm, by the way, this is not for an immediate discussion, but I'm sitting next to John Miller of ABC News, who you've heard often this morning, is one of the only reporters in the world to have gone to see Osama bin Laden in Afghanistan. And as the day goes on, we'll clearly deal with this in even greater depth, John, than at the moment. But what we are now dealing with is a devastating human tragedy as the result of terrorism in New York City and in Washington, D.C. And just before I talk to John Cochran, well, I'm more than happy to listen to these people on the street if we can possibly hear from them. But just in case, by some remote possibility, at 8 o'clock Pacific time, along the West Coast, you've just turned on your television or you're continuing to watch it, let me just review for you where we think we are at the moment. Because it is both a tragedy that has revealed itself before the eyes of millions of people in the country watching on television, and a complete mystery as to how, as we heard from Vince Calistrauer just a moment ago, how this could have happened in such a coordinated way without any of the intelligence service of the United States having much a clue about it. So just before 9 o'clock this morning, just at about 8:50, an aircraft, which we now believe had been hijacked and flew into a building, and then shortly after that, that was at 9 o'clock, or just after it showed up on the wire services about 9:04. We could see it happen live on television as a second aircraft hit the other tower of the twin trade towers in New York City. Thousands of people had just arrived at work. As time passed, we understood that these aircraft had been, we believed, hijacked in both instances. Perhaps certainly one, an American Airlines aircraft which is destined for Los Angeles, had been hijacked and flown. Pilot either forced to fly, very hard to believe, and of course we'll never know unless they find the black boxes from these aircraft, or somebody on board that aircraft killed or got rid of the pilot and went to the controls and flew the plane into the building themselves. And then as much of the country began to connect and try to grapple with this, then we had this horrifying circumstances of first one of the towers, this is the second aircraft flying in, then first one of the towers and then the other tower collapsing on itself with, at the very least, hundreds and probably thousands of people who did not manage to get out of the building after the two initial collisions. And the country, the political and military establishment of the country just began to lock down very quickly. First of all, there was concern at the White House because outside the west side of the White House, behind the Executive Office building, we then began to see that there was fire, and that was what appears now to have been an attack on the Pentagon. Just shortly thereafter, this was this other tower of the Pentagon, the first tower of the Pentagon, which began to fall down upon itself. The World Trade Centers, of course, is what I mean. Thank you. Just stay out of my ear for a second. I'm just trying to bring people up to date on the order of which things happened. So we then had New York City's airspace all around locked down. The airports closed down at LaGuardia and Newark and John F. Kennedy. Nobody was allowed to take off. And then shortly after that, the Federal Aviation Administration became involved and told aircraft nowhere in the country to take off. And then all aircraft flying anywhere in the country, because there was so much concern, and there is still some, that there is an aircraft somewhere out in the country which has been unaccounted for. All aircraft in the country were ordered to land immediately at the nearest airport. And then, of course, the second devastating thing at the trade towers themselves, when the second trade tower collapsed on itself. The president was in Florida, and the president, down in Florida today to talk about education, came very quickly to the cameras, clearly as shocked as any of us in the rest of the country. He talked to the FBI and others. He immediately canceled his education trip to Washington today, to Florida today, and said he was going to come back to Washington, which is exactly what the country expects of him. And he said very briefly on camera that this terrorism against the United States will not stand. As we've said before, the kind of thing he had to say. And John Cochran went to Florida with him. And John, I think you're still in Florida and the president came home. Is that my understanding?
That's right. We're grounded like all other Americans. The airport here is close to us. The president is on his way back, but we don't know where he's going to land. You know, normally, Peter, the president would land at Andrews Air Force Base, Maryland, a military base, a secure base. just outside of Washington, D.C. However, network camera crews have been barred from going to Andrews Air Force Base. It apparently has been roped off and barred to news media. We do not know if the president is going there, and the White House is being very close-mouthed about it. And you can understand why they would want to create the question in some people's minds as to where the president will land. We've been told that when the president returns, he will have a National Security Council meeting. But where will that happen? Will it be in Washington? I can't help but think back to November 22nd, 1963, the assassination of John Kennedy. At that time, the Secret Service was in a great hurry to get the new president, Lyndon Johnson, back to Washington, D.C., a safe place. It's no